It's Idaho Local Edition. Brad Pomerance here in Boise, the state capital, joined by Bob Nonini. He is a member of the Idaho State Senate. And I want to speak with you about education, a passion of yours. The new administration is coming in Washington. And what's interesting about the Trump administration, they're very focused on manufacturing jobs, skilled jobs. A lot of those jobs will need a very specific type of education, often provided by community colleges. And I know in Idaho, you're looking to expand community colleges. Talk us through that.
Man, you'd think you just set me up with the greatest question ever.
I try.
You know, up in Kootenai County, we have the North Idaho campus, North Idaho College. It's a community college, 2-year programs, and they have a career technical facility that just opened up next to the 3 school districts, K-12, career technical, and it's a great collaboration. In fact, the governor mentioned on Monday at his State of the State about doing the same thing in Lewiston. And so we in Northern Idaho think we're setting an example in that regard, because it's different than when I'm an old guy. It's different. It's different than when I was a young person, where it was more manual labor. It's about science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and what's known as STEM. Some people will refer to it as STEAM, as we add the arts to that, and that's really important.
I'm wondering also, in addition to what's happening in North Idaho, where you represent, we also know that there are efforts in Eastern Idaho, for example, to convert Eastern Idaho Technical College into a community college. There are efforts, Western Idaho, College of Western Idaho, to expand into Boise. So there are a lot of moves on the education front, for sure.
And there should be. It's the most important thing, the 3 E's: education, employment, economy. They all go hand in hand. If we want a good economy, we need a good education system.
In the governor's recent State of the State address, he talked about higher education. And he mentioned that a commission had been formed to focus on K-12, arguably successful.
Yes.
We have the career ladder, 5-year plan. He wants to do the same for higher ed.
Yes.
What do you make of the governor's call?
I'm very supportive of it. In fact, the pro tem of the Senate has recommended my appointment on that
Be careful what you wish for.
Well, you know how that goes. You miss a meeting, they nominate you.
Right.
Yeah, it's just so important, again, about the economy and how education goes with the economy. You don't have to sell Idaho to people about fishing, hiking, camping, skiing, boating, golfing. We have the best in the country.
We do.
People want to know about the education that they're going to put their families in, or their workforce's families, and they want to know about finding that workforce.
But what's interesting about the economy is, while Idaho, its unemployment rate is practically infinitesimal, there are jobs available. There are people looking for jobs, but there's a mismatch of skills.
Good. Very much so.
And so that's, I'm sure, part of the focus, is how do we close that gap, that mismatch?
I created some legislation a couple years ago called the STEM Action Center, and I wanted to put it in the governor's office. I didn't want it in the State Department of Education. I didn't want it in the department or the board. I wanted it in the governor's office. We passed it within just a couple of months. It's up for 1.5 years now. It's been running. They're doing a phenomenal job. So businesses will see that Idaho is doing the right thing education-wise. So they will bring their businesses here.
Right. I want to also get a sense about how we can turn the advantages that we've seen with K-12 and move them into the community college realm or the higher education realm. Because, look, it's hard to deny, with K-12 being successful, that sets the stage for community college and higher ed.
Years ago, we saw so many students that were top of their class in K-12, their junior, senior years, going off to their freshman, sophomore years in college and needing remediation. So what's happening there? What are we missing there? That they would be at the top of their class, their junior and senior years in math and science things, but then needing remediation their freshman, sophomore years in college. So I think there was a disconnect. And I think what we have worked on is getting rid of, eliminating that disconnect. I think the governor is putting together the task force now on higher ed is just another step in removing that disconnect.
Speaking of eliminating, we have a surplus eliminator. And the surplus eliminator has been a mechanism to fund not just the rainy day fund in Idaho, but transportation. And arguably has done a pretty good job. but that eliminator is due to sunset. Now, arguably, you and your colleagues could extend it. I don't know if that's going to happen. But let's talk through transportation and infrastructure spending, because despite the eliminator, Idaho has needs in terms of transportation and roads.
It has big needs. It's one of my other committee assignments.
Lucky you. You got the two big ones.
Yeah, Vice Chairman of the Transportation Committee in the Senate. We have recently had a meeting. We will have it every couple of weeks with the Director of Transportation talking specifically about this issue. Getting rid of the sunset so that stays there permanently.
But do you believe that that could happen? Because you're going to need bicameral support to extend the sunset of the surplus eliminator.
I think we can work on it. Some of my colleagues in the Senate get nervous to go over to the House with legislation because, it has to pass both bodies and stuff. Before I served in the Senate, now my 5th year in the Senate, I served 8 years in the House. So I have a great relationship with House leadership. The Speaker of the House is a good friend of mine.
Mr. Bedke?
Yeah. The Majority Leader is a good friend of mine. We sat together for 8 years on the House Transportation Committee. And so I'm very comfortable on both sides of the rotunda, and we need to work together. We can have our debates. I was going to say arguments, but they're not really arguments. They're just good debate. We can have some minor differences, but at the end of the day, we all have to work together to make it a great state.
I'm glad you brought that up, because what some folks in the House will say is we have this surplus, let's use it to cut taxes. Now that feels good, and I'm sure we want to cut taxes, but they say, the House brings up tax cut bills and the Senate kills them. You've heard that. I'm not saying anything you haven't heard.
Yeah, for sure.
And the governor, in a State of the State, he seems a little reticent. I mean, he's maybe on employment tax cuts, but, there are state needs. And so where do you go?
Brad, I like what you're saying. I think you ought to run for office.
Well, I don't know about that. My wife would probably take me out if I thought of it, but continue, sir.
I think we can work through those things. If we're going to have some tax cuts, and we need to help the people at the lower income levels, and maybe a tax cut on sales tax on food. Let's get rid of that. The income tax issue, I don't think Idaho's income tax is too bad. Maybe we can look at the corporate side of things, but we need to take the money we have and invest in education, grow the economy, have more people paying taxes, then we can seriously look at tax cuts.
It's funny you mention Idaho's taxes, because you can pull a statistic and use it to your advantage. But as I understand it, Idaho's tax burden, if you look at everything, is the lowest amongst all its neighbors, and it's 41st lowest in the entire nation. But then some folks can say, but except in this area we're higher than Oregon, and in this area we're higher than Utah.
But let's look at the big picture, like you just said. Maybe we should get some of those House guys back over here and get 2 or 3 chairs here and have that discussion. And bring that up, because they want to pinpoint one issue. When we look at the big picture, you hit the nail right on the head. Our overall tax structure is low.
But in the end, I have to say, as I see it, the surplus eliminator, whether it extends or not, that was an example of bicameral support, bicameral compromise. And so hopefully this session we can see that again. Because in the end, you're all about Idaho. We all want the best for Idaho.
And you've heard the story. You're knowledgeable about Idaho. You've heard the story about what we need for maintenance on roads. And we got a little bit of it a couple of years ago, but we're still a couple $100 million away.
We'll have you back. His name is Bob Nonini. He is a senator in the great state of Idaho. My name is Brad Pomerance, coming to you from Boise. This is Idaho Local Edition.
Learn more about your community, your state, your nation on Spectrum Local Edition. Local Edition is Spectrum's community news program featuring local area leaders, elected officials, and the people who are working to make a difference here in Idaho. Check your Spectrum guide for details on airing dates and times. It's all for you, it's all about Idaho, and only on Spectrum. Spectrum Local Edition, interesting topics from interesting people.